What if I told you that a lot of the smartest people you know aren't actually great thinkers? What if they're just really, really good at repeating stuff they've heard? Okay, let's get into this because it turns out that deep understanding has almost nothing to do with how smart you are and everything to do with a few key habits. Habits that honestly, most of us were just never taught. Right, so we tend to think that being a good thinker is some kind of natural born talent, but that completely misses the mark. The real difference isn't brilliance, it's the approach they take. See, most people don't really think, they just accept. They learn the lingo, they memorize the facts, they use the right words. But that is not the same thing as understanding, not even close. And this really gets to the heart of it, right? You've got two different approaches. On one side, you have acceptance. This is basically just repeating information. It's like being a parrot. You can say the words, but you don't really get what they mean. But on the other side, you have understanding. This is all about taking ideas apart to see how they actually work. It's the huge difference between just knowing the name for something and actually having real knowledge. Because let's be honest, labels are not knowledge. So, here's the most important takeaway. The gap between just accepting something and truly understanding it, it's not about intelligence. It's all about habit. Deep thinking is a skill. And like any skill, it's built through very specific, very learnable practices that literally anyone can adopt. It all comes down to how you choose to engage with information. Okay, so let's jump into our first habit. I like to call this the translation test. And it's all about taking an idea from something you've just memorized and turning it into something you can actually see and feel, something real. Deep thinkers are always, and I mean always, asking this one simple question. Anytime they run into a big abstract idea, they stop and ask, okay, but what does this actually look like in the real world? If I could see this concept in action, what would I be seeing? It sounds so simple, but most people just skip right over this step, and the idea just kind of floats around in their head, totally disconnected from anything. And what you're doing when you ask that question, you're building something called a schema. A schema is just your mental model for how something works. It's what you get when you slow down and turn those abstract ideas into little movies in your head. Imagining all the moving parts, the cause and effect, that is the foundation of knowledge you can actually use. If you can't picture it, you don't have a strong schema. Simple as that. All right, moving on to a couple of habits that really go hand in hand. Question and simplify. So once you have that first mental picture, the next step is to really test it. First by breaking it down into its most basic parts, and then by building it back up so clearly that anyone could get it. This is habit number 2. Stay curious. Look, your job is not to be a recording device that just plays back what a book or a professor said. Your job is to be an architect, to actually reconstruct that knowledge for yourself. True understanding only happens when you can strip an idea down to its bare bones and then build it back up in your own words. It's kind of like taking a rough sketch and turning it into a super detailed, solid drawing. Which brings us perfectly to habit number 3, simplify. So many people hide behind complicated jargon and fancy technical language. It makes them feel smart, but it's a total trap. Using complex language isn't a sign of intelligence. More often than not, it's a huge red flag that the person doesn't really know what they're talking about. And I mean, who said it better than Albert Einstein, right? This quote is the ultimate litmus test for understanding. Real expertise isn't about sounding complicated. It's about clarity. The ability to make something simple is the final undeniable proof that you have truly mastered it. So our final 2 habits are a little different. They're less about technique and more about your mindset. Because honestly, all the translating and simplifying in the world won't do you any good if you don't have the right foundation. This is about being honest with yourself and being willing to put in the effort that deep learning requires. So habit number 4 is just admitting when you don't know something. I get it, we all want to seem smart, but so many of us would rather protect the illusion of knowing something than actually become competent. We nod along, we pretend we get it, and in doing that, we slam the door shut on any real learning. The second you can say, you know what, I don't get this, that's the second real learning can actually start. So why is it so hard to just admit we don't know? Well, a big part of it is a funky little cognitive bias you may have heard of, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Basically, it's this weird phenomenon where the people who know the least about something are the most likely to think they're experts. They literally don't know enough to realize how much they don't know. But thankfully, there's a powerful antidote, and it's called metacognition. All this means is thinking about your own thinking. It's the skill of stepping back and taking an honest look at what you truly understand, what's still a little fuzzy, and whether the way you're trying to learn is even working. It's about being the pilot of your own learning, not just a passenger. And that leads us straight into our final habit: embrace discomfort. You see, when learning feels easy and comfortable, that's usually just assimilation. You're just adding a new piece of information to a puzzle you've already figured out. But deep learning, that's accommodation. And that happens when a new piece of information doesn't fit, when it actually breaks your puzzle. And that process is hard. It forces you to completely rethink everything. So here's the bottom line. That feeling of being confused, of being uncomfortable, that isn't a sign that you're failing. It's actually a signal that you are on the verge of a real breakthrough. Deep thinkers don't run away from that feeling. They lean into it. They know that wrestling with that confusion is exactly where real insight is born. So let's wrap this all up. Becoming a deep thinker isn't about being some kind of genius. It's not a special gift that only a few people get. It's about being intentional. It's about building these intellectual habits, one by one, into how you go about your day. So here they are again, the 5 big habits. Number 1, translate ideas into something real. Don't just memorize words. 2, stay curious and reconstruct knowledge for yourself. 3, simplify everything to prove you really get it. 4, have the guts to admit what you don't know. And finally, number 5, learn to love that feeling of confusion because it means you're growing. I'll leave you with this amazing quote from the physicist Richard Feynman. At the end of the day, all of these habits really just boil down to intellectual honesty. The biggest thing standing in the way of our own learning is usually us. So the real question is, are you willing to stop fooling yourself so you can start to truly understand?